Hey, everyone. All right. Okay. Lecture 39. I am going to do one on Wednesday that you don't have to come to, but I realized it would just be so long today's, and I would do a disservice to what I really want to do at the very end, which is give everybody a lot of advice and sort of prescriptions that you can take or leave with mechanisms behind them. Where how do we incorporate this sleep information? We all sleep badly. Some of us sleep worse than others. JP has an insomnia logo above his bed. But so some of us, we all have different sleep schedules. Some of us are just can't do it at all. Some of us occasionally do swing shift. We do night shifts. Some of us just kind of toss and turn and roll and do like calisthenics in the bedroom. And but how do we overcome this stuff? Because the sleep drugs, I mean, these like Ambien, stuff like that, truly terrible, these things. Would I rather do Ambien to sleep at night or cocaine to wake up in the morning? What has worse side effects? Ambien, probably. Now, there's a huge profit margin. You can look up the profits of this thing, and it's, I mean, like billions a year. I mean, they make so much money, which tells us that the one of the great problems in the 21st century is how the hell are we supposed to fall asleep at night? It is so hard to fall asleep at night, and a lot of that is the inputs that we have in the sort of not just digital age, but electricity and the iPads and all of this. The world never sleeps, and neither do we, and that you can control. There's so much stuff that you really can uh, have an intervention with, that you can manipulate, that's going to work way better than Ambien. Because does Ambien even really work to make you sleep? There are studies that show you fall asleep like 6 minutes sooner, stuff like that, as compared to a placebo. The placebos always work pretty well in the subjective sleep scores. But so many people have sleeping problems. So many people. And I've always been envious of those who could just fall asleep. And you know that cliche, oh, asleep before my head hit the pillow or whatever. There are people who can do that, and there are people who can sleep in the morning, and they fall asleep, and then the sun blasts their face 9 hours later, and they're like, whoa, what happened? Where'd the night go? There are people who are capable of that. Those people are more rare than what I assume is you and me, who are like, man, I wish I could sleep. And you like, wow, what time is it? Damn it. Like that sort of sleep anxiety, you are among crowds of people who secretly share an identical problem of I just cannot sleep at night. I'm getting 3 hours. I actually slept well last night, but which is sort of the inverse of what you expect. I fast on Sundays, and every Sunday night I always sleep well. I went to bed at 8 o'clock. I put on a little meditation app, the little Sam Harris meditation app, for one of the long ones. He does like little 30-minute ones too. And I was asleep before it ended. But the 2 nights before that, I probably got 4 hours of sleep a night. But I give myself, I am a maniac about giving myself what's called sleep opportunity. Not how much sleep do I get, but sleep opportunity, which is the amount of hours that you grant yourself, that you segregate from your waking life and say, these 8 hours, nothing can invade this. And I'm going to do my damnedest to depart this world for the entire time. My damnedest doesn't always equate to real sleep. Last night it did, but usually when people are really hungry, so don't go to bed starving, or fasting, or you do see a slight disruption of sleep often. often because you get this ghrelin response, food seeking. You want to get up and go acquire food, and so you have a harder time submitting to slumber. But for me, on days where I fast, I only fast for 1 day a week, and I don't prolong it any longer than that 1 day. And I always sleep well on those nights. Some people do, some people don't. But on a Wednesday, again, don't feel you have to be here. All I'm going to do is at the normal time, just going to give advice. I'm going to say, here are a bunch of variables you can manipulate. Here's stuff that you can incorporate into your life to solve sleep. And it's not going to be take drugs, because at some point, I don't know if those drugs are going to stay legal. I mean, just look at the cancer rates on those drugs. It is truly stunning, for people on things like Ambien and whatever, Lunesta or whatever. And we can talk about some of that, because you're not really getting real sleep. What you're doing is like when you drink yourself to sleep, you just booze yourself into oblivion. Okay, there's a depression, a cognitive depression, not a psychological depression, but that is going to um, send you into a sleep-like sedative state. But being sedated and being asleep, not even close to the same thing. You do this with an EEG, like look at the brain waves, look at what's happening, look at these ultradian cycles, deep sleep and REM and the cycles. Where the hell did REM sleep go? Oh, well, it just didn't happen because he was drunk. And so we have these complications when you take medications, whether that is self-medicating with alcohol. THC affects it too. It seems to send us to sleep with relative haste, or it can anyway. But the quality of the sleep, the nature of that sleep is remarkably different from normal biological sleep. And commonly what you lose is REM. And that REM sleep is critical. You cannot lose deep sleep or REM sleep without suffering cognitive consequences. And some of that is actually brain damage. And so you want to be and so part of the issue about if you just take sedatives, right? Well, just give me my, Ambien and you're not actually getting the sleep that you think you are. You are dissociating. You are distancing yourself from the waking world, but not in a way that is actual sleep, where you're going through these sleep stages and getting the effects of them. So on Wednesday, I will talk about the stuff that you can manipulate that actually works better than any pharmacological agent. Stuff that you can incorporate into your daily routine, that you can adjust, and you will get a better effect out of those things than you would out of any prescription. And you don't get the horrible side effects. Like I don't say this in jest. It's healthier, I think. Look at the literature, and it's a good comparison. I'll just say that. It's a good comparison to say, okay, I'm going to get off of Ambien and I'm just going to do cocaine every morning. I'm going to have a rail of Coke on my pillow, and I'm going to wake up and go as I stretch, and then I'm going to embrace the day. What are the complications of that? Well, they're bad. That's not a good way of going through life. But are they worse than Ambien? Probably not. And so what can we do in the place of cocaine and Ambien, or overdoing the caffeine, which is okay. It's okay to overdo caffeine, but there's a timing signature that is best. And I'll talk about that timing signature on Wednesday. Sorry for going over the semester, but the last thing I do want to give you, the most useful, I feel like it'll be the best, the most employable, prescriptive sentences that I can provide this semester will be that one. And I just don't want to do it disservice by stretching it sort of too thin today. So you know this, everything sleeps. We have a circadian rhythm about a day. We're a diurnal species, day night cycles, all life. We're gonna respond to the rising sun and the setting sun and the rising darkness, the rising moon, whatever. And that light and darkness cycle affects our circadian rhythms. There is a genetic component into that in part determines, not fully, but in part determines whether we rise early or late. Life demands that we rise early. For some people, you just can't do it. It's just your genes insist that you don't, and you're going to wind up with potential cardiovascular problems if you try to. So make sure that you find a job, a career, a lifestyle that maps onto your chronobiology, that maps onto your sleep schedule. Cortisol, epinephrine, and the rising temperature. But cortisol, epinephrine, these are things that are going to get you out of bed in the morning, part of the circadian rhythm. And the interesting part, when you see norepinephrine, that's not really this let's get out of bed in the morning as much as epinephrine is. Epinephrine is let's get out of bed in the morning, part of that, and then cortisol. But norepinephrine, when we go into non-REM sleep, this sort of non-REM, let's descend into deep sleep. Let's go through these stages of non-REM sleep and kind of wind our way into the depths. Let's get into deep sleep. You'll see this preservation of some norepinephrine. There's not a ton in there. If you're going to sleepwalk, if you've ever done that, I used to do it when I was a kid, that is happening during non-REM sleep. You are not sleepwalking during REM sleep. And it's easy. You don't actually need to read the literature to know this. You can read the literature to discover this, but all you need to do is wake somebody up who is sleepwalking. Like, let's say it's Van Ness. Hey, Van Ness. And you wake him up. He's like, whoa, what am I doing here? They have no idea what they're doing. It's not like, oh my God, can I tell you about the dream I was just having? Okay, so in my dream, nobody ever says that when you wake them up from sleepwalking. They're just confused. What the hell is happening? Now, during non-REM sleep, you actually do experience some dreams, but it's not vivid. There are some thought patterns. You wake somebody up in non-REM sleep, and they'll say stuff like, "Well, yeah, I was thinking about like a treadmill for some reason." But it's not a dream. Nobody says, "Oh, you got to hear this crazy dream I had last night." That's REM sleep. Those dreams are from REM sleep. There are thought patterns and stuff that occur to you during non-REM sleep, during deep sleep, and that's when you can be found sleepwalking, because the reason you will never sleepwalk unless you have what is a horrible condition to have, you are supposed to experience atonia. I'll talk about this in a little bit in a few slides, but we're on a slide where it's showing norepinephrine. During REM sleep, you get no norepinephrine. I mean, it just bottoms out. You have none of this stuff. And so you're unable to act out your dreams. It's a way of paralyzing you. You get this sleep paralysis, and so you're unable to act out your dreams. Now, there are some people, usually older in life, who do act out their dreams, and those, that doesn't end well. I mean, they're just to act out your dreams. Sleepwalking is one thing. Losing paralysis during REM sleep. I mean, you are just paralyzed, and we'll get there. And that can intrude actually when you wake up. I don't know if any of you have ever had this experience. I had it one time. Some stuff, there are rumors that I haven't seen in the literature about THC can increase the odds of intrusion into the waking state. But when you wake up, some people sometimes will experience paralysis, sleep paralysis in the waking state. It only lasts a couple of seconds, and then you regain control of your limbs and tissues and sinews and motions. But during REM sleep, you are unable to move. You have no norepinephrine in that point of your sleep. You don't have any norepi, which also, fascinatingly, when people have nightmares, they sometimes will wake up in a panic, heart going. Okay, what causes the heart to go like that? Well, norepi, right? The sympathetic nervous system. That is not parasympathetic activity, right? That's not acetylcholine. That is norepinephrine, not panic. And so if there's no norepinephrine during dream sleep, during REM sleep, then why do people get so panicked? Well, they're panicked when they're awoken, right? So one thing, you can have nightmares. It's possible to have such a thing during non-REM sleep, and you can have norepinephrine during that. But likely what is being experienced is during REM sleep, you have no the amygdala is active, but not in this norepinephrine sense, which is the intensity and fear and anxiety and all this stuff. REM sleep, what you get to do is have these experiences. Matthew Walker calls it the best virtual reality in the world. And that's really what it is. There's no better virtual reality. I guess the best virtual reality would be one where you can decide what to dream on. And I'll talk about that actually on Wednesday. There's a little bit of evidence that there is control, but not much. Some people can do it. Maybe you're one of them. It's called lucid dreaming. You can look it up. There's plenty of literature on it. But when we wake up, as soon as you wake up, you get to have your sympathetic nervous system activity back. You're not in REM sleep. And so suddenly your heart's going, right? So people think that they have this like terrifying experience in their dream. My nightmare, I woke up from and I was in a panic. And well, you panicked when you woke up. There was no panic when you were in it. Was it scary? Sure. When you woke up, you assign fear to it. But during REM sleep, that's not something that can happen. Now, during non-REM sleep, it's possible that that's something that could arise, but the norepinephrine is lost during REM sleep, and you are just paralyzed. Again, we have circadian rhythms, glucocorticoids. That's cortisol. It's a bidirectional pathway, a two-way road where we are causing the release of cortisol, and cortisol is causing the events that take place later, right? The pineal gland, let's release our melatonin and tuck us into bed at night, read us a little story, and, don't let the bed bugs bite. So circadian rhythms, remember light, we're a diurnal species. Light is the biggest stimulus, but there's non-photic, non-photon, non-lux, non-light stimuli as well. Suprachiasmatic nucleus, definitely know this little thing. It sits right above the optic chiasm where it crosses. And so all that light information is going to be processed by the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And that is the control center, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, that is the control center for your circadian rhythms. It really is the boss for this stuff. That's your body's alarm clock. It sets the alarm clock, but it has inputs that say, here's how to set it. And you can manipulate those inputs in a very effective way. Again, more effective than drugs. You can do it. It's just people don't want to do it. All right, turn your screen off. Nobody wants to do that. It's like telling a little kid, go stand in the corner. They don't want to stand in the corner. Or like telling like a 10-year-old, all right, it's bedtime, but the adults get to stay up. Like it's that stuff. You don't want to do these things, but are they ridiculously more powerful than any existing drug in terms of eliciting a biological sleep response? Of course. You just don't want to do it. It's the same thing with exercise or healthful eating, right? Is the cake bad for you? Yeah, but people are going to eat it anyway, right? Is cardiovascular activity healthy? Yeah, but people don't want to do it. Just give me the pill. Well, okay, your blood pressure is horrible. Okay, well, give me like I don't know, an ACE inhibitor or whatever. Give me something for the blood pressure. Don't make me change my diet or change my exercise. Don't make me do something active. Don't make me incorporate behavior changes in my life. Just give me a pill so I can go on being a slob. That's what people want to do in life. And with sleep, there are really effective interventions, and the drugs suck. The drugs just they don't induce. If you want cancer in a hurry, go ahead, take the drugs. But if you, and I'll talk about this today when I'm talking about the consequences of getting poor sleep, the medications give you the equivalent of poor sleep. You just drink yourself to sleep. It's essentially the same thing. Let's just sedate ourselves and pretend we're sleeping. Um, so we have these intrinsically photoreceptive retinal ganglion cells. Let's process light, send that information to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and recalibrate the clock all the time. Sometimes they're called melanopsin expressing retinal ganglion cells. That's the exact same thing as the intrinsically photoreceptive or the melanopsin expressing. Those are the exact same thing. There may be a little bit of visual information that's processed through there, but the bulk of their role, their primary role, just like insulin does a ton of stuff in the body. Insulin is very anabolic in a number of directions. It blocks lipolysis, it turns on mTOR, it does a lot of things. What's insulin's primary role? We'll throw some sugar into the cells. There's sugar in the blood. Let's put it into the cell. So let's, mobilize GLUT4. That's insulin's primary function, but it does a ton of other stuff too. The primary function of these is let's set our SCN, our suprachiasmatic nucleus. Let's interpret light information and set it. And we always have, every day, we have to reset this thing because you are probably about 15 minutes or so over a day where if you just gouged out your eyeballs and you had nothing to process light, or you went into a cave or whatever with no light, or you just wore a remarkable blindfold around, at that point, you would eventually find yourself sleeping in the day and up at night, and then you would eventually find yourself sleeping at night and up in the day. You just, every day would be a little bit longer and a little bit longer and a little bit longer until you whatever gained or lost a day, whatever that would be. Now, the circadian rhythms depend on the outdoor sun. If you do go into that cave, we've known this since the 30s. Circadian has been a vocabulary item since the late 30s and really found its footing in the 50s. But depending on where you are, the sunlight is different, and that will calibrate your circadian clock differently. But the sun, that is the mother and father of all circadian adjustment, is the sun. And the color of the sun, go look at the sunrise. Now, what is really going to suppress your pineal gland, your melatonin, what is going to suppress that? Blue light. That's what's going to do it. But the sunrise, go look at this. There are all these blues and yellows, and the color profile is there to alert you. I mean, really, those blues are what's going to do it. It's there to wake you up in the morning. Now, there's a circadian dead zone where you don't actually change anything in the middle of the day. In the middle of the day, you go, okay, it's time to go look at the sky. Now, if you're like a day sleeper and you're up at night and whatever, there's something different to talk about here. But the best time to go set your circadian clock is when the low solar angle, the sun is rising and is low in the sky and it's coming up, and the profile, that color spectrum, is ideal to recalibrate your suprachiasmatic nucleus. And the reason we process colors, there's an evolutionary explanation of why blue is so heavily recognized by the eyes, which is sort of all aquatic animals. So if you want to look into evolutionary biology and the explanation of why is creatures and their blue light, why are they so sensitive to blue light? Well, what color, what happens to the light? Is it, it's the ocean. And so, blues is what you get to see. But the survival reason, the important reason for compatibility with our land-dwelling diurnal environment is that there's cloud cover a lot of the time. Clouds just live in the sky, especially if there's pollution. Those clouds are up there all the time, and you have to be able to tell morning from afternoon, from night, you have to be able to distinguish these times of day so you can keep your circadian clock dialed in. How do you do that? The profile of colors, the color spectrum, and man, blue is a big deal. And you're not getting it later as much as you are in that morning. So outside, even if under shade, right, inside is just like nothing. So you really got to get outside in the morning. You can test this yourself with one of these lux meters. You can get it on your phone. Just go get an app on your phone, stand in front of a window and see what the difference is between standing outside or looking at the light or looking at the TV, looking at your iPad or your phone or whatever, these sources of light, the fridge light, looking at these lux outputs as compared, remember, just photon energy, and looking at the comparison of that to going outside. Wear your glasses if you go outside, but light has to come in through the eyes if you're going to get light as a trigger, as a manipulator of your suprachiasmatic nucleus, of your circadian rhythm. The study that came out in Science that said you can do it in your knee, let's just shine a flashlight on your popliteal space, right, your knee pit, there were errors in that study, and came out later, and people have tried a number of times to find extraocular photoreception to see if you can set your suprachiasmatic nucleus if you don't get it through your eyes, and the answer so far remains no. A lot of studies have looked at this, and the answer is no in every study, except when the studies are done poorly. And like, okay, I'm going to shine a light. Don't try not to look at it, but they shine it like in your mouth, and like, well, I got a ton in my eye too. So there are limitations of the studies that indicate that there is. And all of the studies that are sound, that have good methods, you do not have extraocular photoreception. That light has to come in through the eyes if you're going to set your circadian rhythm that way. Don't trump the sun, don't just stare at it. But yeah, with blind people who have some light perception, maybe like totally blind, this article says, but yeah, okay, that may be an exaggeration of reality, but people who have light reception, if you can perceive light, then yes, you can be blind and still get this. But people who are totally blind typically have terrible sleeping problems. Their circadian rhythms are super disrupted if you're totally blind. Non-photic, remember, that's you're eating, you're exercising, you're doing social things, something cognitively engaging, you're taking drugs, whether that is, we'll talk about melatonin on Wednesday. Or stimulants, whether it's caffeine or Coke or meth or anything from Adderall to the rail of on your pillow to get you up in the morning because you decided to switch to that. You decided to make the good decision, the health-minded decision of giving up. People are gonna hear this and I'm gonna get sued. So you don't need to know this, but the intergeniculate leaflet, this is part of that communication with the suprachiasmatic nucleus, this IGL, the intergeniculate leaflet, and that's part of the communication with the suprachiasmatic nucleus of these non-photic stimuli. But temperature is a huge one. Temperature is this big part of your regulation, and we'll talk about that on Wednesday, how to manipulate it optimally. But the pineal gland, right, that's melatonin, adenosine, and that's what caffeine is inhibiting. Remember that melatonin is made from serotonin, and serotonin is, we feel satisfied in life. I can sit here and be relaxed, be in my little meditative state, and be fine with the world. Is California going to burn down again this year? Yeah, but I'm okay with that. Do I hear gunshots at night sometimes? Yeah, but I'm okay with that. That is your serotonin effect, but I'm okay with that. You're relaxed. There's no urgency to get up and change things. norepinephrine. I mean, let's get up and be active about this. We got things to do. We got stuff to resolve, right? So that's more of a norepinephrine effect. But you get your melatonin from serotonin. And the pineal gland, only place that that's going to happen. Remember that we don't have good melatonin rhythms when we're freshly born, right? When we're living in utero, when we're all up in the womb, we have a nice rhythm of melatonin. We're living on mama's supply. We're born and it's just all over the place. So it takes time, at least a few months for this to stabilize and they get some sort of a rhythm. But even then, it's not as rhythmic as would be that you would find in an adult. And that melatonin is in adults too. You are suppressing testosterone. So people who are taking melatonin as a supplement, there are implications of testosterone suppression, stuff like that. Gonadotropin releasing hormone to luteinizing hormone, and then you get your testosterone or estrogen for lady folk. But there is a inhibition of puberty and melatonin. So this stuff is just weird. I would not do this to a child unless the goal is, well, my son has a really high voice and he's singing operas and I just got to I cannot possibly allow him to hit puberty. And I want to do it as naturally as possible. Right? I want to, keep him singing those arias or whatever for as long as I can. So I'm just going to load him up on melatonin. I don't know. Okay, maybe. But puberty, right? Gonadotropin releasing hormone, we're inhibiting that thing. This is what you expect to see for melatonin. That tends to not be what we see. This is an ideal. That tends to not quite be what we see because of things like light in our lives. I decided to put in Dracula from Castlevania 1 this time. It was the Dracula from Castlevania 2 last time. Blue light, that is really what's doing it. And again, as the sun makes its procession through the sky, you will get different wavelengths in your eyeballs. And at that low solar angle, you're going to get this let's alert ourselves. Let's really get up out of slumber. Let's wake ourselves up. So going outside, from watching the sunrise, you're gonna get a light profile that is ideal. And so the timing of exposure, though, you can phase advance, meaning I want to get up earlier and go to bed earlier. You can set that. You can set your circadian rhythm by when you look at the sun, or you can phase delay. Just keep it dark for a while and then go experience sunlight later. And so when you go squint at the outdoor sun, that's going to help phase advance or phase delay. And that's a lot of what we'll be talking about on Wednesday, is how to manipulate your circadian rhythm optimally. But in the morning, you're not very sensitive. In the morning, it takes a lot of light to accomplish anything. In the evening, just the tiniest, a light bulb will do it. In the morning, will a light bulb work? Will a computer screen work? Will a TV or a iPhone, will any of these things work? No. They're light, but you're gonna have to stare at that thing for like a year to get out of bed. I mean, the amount of lux you're generating from that is insufficient from morning to promote alertness. That is insufficient. In the evening, just like, oh, I have my bedside lamp. Too much. You are going to delay melatonin. Your sleep's going to suck. Probably. Can you look at the moon? Yeah. Can you look at a candle? Yeah. Can you even look at a fireplace? Yeah. The lux profile is very different in those things. Now, something you could do is have red lights around the house, sort of a sunset, right? If you have red lights, and especially floor lights, because your eyes are much more sensitive to light above than light below, then you can find your way to the bathroom and put your toothpaste on your toothbrush without any real strain or without missing, right? You don't like pee all over the floor and go, shit, I thought there was a toilet there. You can have an amount of light, but don't have any blue light. eliminate all blue light and all of the like overhead house lights and stuff like that. Man, you're going to have crappy sleep if you leave those things on. And so the insomnia is your fault if you have overhead lights on. In a couple hours before you go to bed, have some dim stuff around the house, fine. And then if you can transition into some red lighting, some mellow lighting, you'll sleep so much better than any drug could do. The blue, the overhead lights rapidly reduce melatonin. Melatonin and dopamine share an inverse relationship. They are opponents, they are rivals. And so if you get up at like 3 in the morning and you go to the bathroom, and I don't know what time you go, let's say you went to bed at 11 or something, and you're going to get up at 7. And you get up in the morning and it's 4 o'clock and you go to the bathroom and you turn the light on. Good luck learning the next day because you just abolished your dopamine. Now you can still learn stuff, but you're not going to learn as well. Your brain isn't going to function as well the next day because you just shot your dopamine. Is it how pronounced is the effect? I don't know. I haven't seen literature on how pronounced the effect is, how catastrophic it is. It's catastrophizing it is probably unhealthy because then you panic. You're like, oh shit, I turned the light on and my life is over. Like, okay, well now you're not going to go back to sleep and that's even worse. But managing light exposure in the night is super important. Now, eating in the middle of the night, you can establish a circadian rhythm that is going to wake you up for food, in addition to adjusting thermoregulation, the thermic effect of food. But light exposure at night, that's really how you're going to mess up your dopamine. And dopamine is so critical for things like learning. So don't do that. Don't expose yourself to light in the middle of the night. Well, I can't sleep. Let me turn on all the lights. Okay, that's a bad decision. Now, if you look at the sunset, there's some evidence, right? You see all these reds in the sunset, and there's some evidence that that light exposure can deaden the effect of your bedside lamp or your iPhone. Okay, go check your email before bed or something. Okay, all right. You watch the sunset. You might be okay. It's still it's advisable not to be checking your electronic devices in the hour before bed or something because your melatonin is just like, oh, I guess I'm not welcome here. I feel oppressed, your melatonin says, and your pineal gland is hiding and quivering. But it seems to be a little bit better if you maybe, right, the sunset. Watching the sunset is not hurting you, and if anything, it's helping you a little bit. The melatonin, we do have changes in the winter, in the summer. Right? In the summer, we're getting less melatonin. In the winter, we're getting more melatonin. The length, you prolong, the length of that melatonin signal gets prolonged. And we do see relationships with the prolonging of the melatonin length. There are associations, whether it is causal, with mood states, emotional states, but we also see things like physical activity is very different. Now, is physical activity different because we're sad, or is it just like shitty weather outside and we don't go exercise, and so now we're sad? There's strong associations there as well. But we do see differences in moods, and we see differences in metabolism. There are circannual differences in metabolism. Just like there are circannual differences in metabolism where our core temperature, we would expect to see this. We would expect to see circadian and circannual differences, these very diurnal differences in body temperature at maybe 90 minutes to 2 hours, something like that. Before you wake up in the morning, you hit your temperature minimum, and then you peak, and maybe 11 hours or so after you wake up, ballpark figures, you're going to hit your temperature maximum. And as you're steeply rising in your temperature, you're going to feel motivated to go exercise, be active, accomplish things, be focused. When you hit your temperature peak, also that you will be focused. That's a great time to exercise, is while you're rising, while you're peaking. As your temperature is falling, that's when you're going to be a little bit more sluggish, a little lethargic. Those feelings of ordinary sedation are going to start affecting you, are going to start settling in. But there are circannual rhythms in temperature as well. Nathaniel and I did work on that and saw it. I'm unfamiliar of work that came before that one that showed this, but it is to be expected given the rhythms that we see in the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And that core temperature is how the suprachiasmatic nucleus communicates with your whole body. It's part of the mechanism of communication with the entire body. And you would expect, it would be weird if we didn't see circannual differences in temperature, in body temperature. Not just like, well, it's hot today, and so I'm hot. It's an uncharacteristically cold day out there, so I'm feeling cold. Not that, but actually a biological circadian rhythm that is different depending on the type of year, depending on sunlight exposure, how long is the day, how long is my alertness signal. So this circannual temperature controlled by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and that temperature, again, increasing temperature, one of the signals to get us out of bed. In the morning, we're going to rise from bed. We have cortisol telling us to, we got rising temperature telling us to, a little bit of epinephrine. There are signals to get us out of bed in the morning, and that temperature is a big one because a suprachiasmatic nucleus, two ways. We are communicating with the suprachiasmatic nucleus about, hey, here's how warm it is, whatever. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus is also communicating with all the cells in regard to temperature. Human performance. Okay, if you want to perform well, do it while you're peaking, rising, you're on a steep upslope and or maybe peaking in your temperature. If your temperature is falling, or at a low, that is not a good time to try to get peak human performance. You are not going to perform very well at that time. We've seen that in our own lab, where there are optimal times for performance and there are suboptimal times for performance. And this study here was looking at a ton of people, I don't know, 112 people and 2750 sets, so over almost 3,000 sets, and looking at the optimal time of human performance for maximal isometric power generation, and pretty strong and consistent effects of when people are strongest, and that's what you would expect to see. So very generally, a typical 24-hour circadian rhythm in your core temperature looks like this, but we mess it up. We do lots of stuff that totally messes this up, and so it's not going to look like this. Like, what does an EKG look like? Well, perfectly, an EKG looks like this beautiful diagram, PQRS stuff. But here's what it actually looks like, and it's a mess, and it's disgusting. Right, that's you've all taken cardiovascular physiology. Like, how the hell do I interpret this hideous line that looks like somebody with Parkinson's tried to draw a straight line? I can't read anything on this. That's what the EKG actually looks like. Then your temperature is going to be sort of similar, but it's going to take on trends. It's going to take on trends that look like this. And it'll have ups where you eat a bunch of meat and you start sweating. It'll have ups where you go exercise. It'll have ups where you're in the heat somewhere. It'll have lulls where you're doing something that keeps you cold, right? You go outside without your jacket or something like that. Now, we live in climate control, and this is part of the problem. I'll talk about this on Wednesday of what to do with your house, of if you want to actually recover your sleep schedule and sleep like a person who sleeps, which is almost nobody anymore. But what to actually do to optimize sleep for temperature. You don't just keep the house the same temperature all the time. That's horrible, because outside, it's not the same temperature all the time. The heat is rising and rising and rising, and then it's lowering and lowering and lowering, and we're supposed to do the same thing. Now, when I go to Uganda, or when I went to Cameroon, the windows don't close. Now, they have screens on them because malaria is everywhere. The Anopheles mosquito is like the most common thing in the air. And so there's screens on the window to try to keep the mosquitoes out, but the windows don't close because, or at least in Uganda, it's this way. I don't recall in Cameroon, because it's like the exact same temperature all year round. I mean, it's on the equator, but it's like a mile high, and so it's just like a perfect temperature always. And so there's no AC, there's no heat in the houses. And at least in the ones I was staying, which at the time were way nicer than the apartment I had in Stockton, way nicer. And there was no way to control the heat, and the windows could not close. So it was just the outdoor temperature inside all the time. Now, what does that mean for circadian rhythms? Well, in the morning, the temperature starts going up and up and up and up and up. In the evening, it's going down, 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 down. And that's what it's supposed to do. That's what it's supposed to do. That's one of our cues that helps prepare us to be alert, and it helps prepare us for bed. And man, do I sleep well when I did when I was in Cameroon. I did when I was in Uganda. I sleep so well. And, the light pollution is minimal in the evening. You just sort of go up and down with the sun, and the temperature is natural. We don't artificially adjust temperatures. And these things are going to mess you up as much as coffee will. Oh, I just had 2 cups of coffee right before bed. Okay. Oh, you're not going to sleep. We can mess ourselves up with the temperature in our houses, in our apartments, in our condos, in our tents, wherever you are. We can mess ourselves up with light exposure, and those things are just as powerful, depending on doses, obviously. I had 65 cups of coffee. Okay, let's go take you to the hospital. The amount of light exposure, the amount of caffeine ingested, there's an argument to be had here, but it's dose dependent. But there are variables you can manipulate. So again, very generally, hour and a half or so. I think I said a princess bride as a unit of measure, as a unit of time. A princess bride, before you wake up, you'll probably hit your temperature minimum and you'll start to rebound. And this happens regardless of whether you're asleep, regardless of whether you're awake. It's your circadian rhythm. It's your circadian clock. That temperature is just going to happen. Now, you can adjust that temperature. You go travel. You go get your jet lag and stuff, and you're going to gradually adjust that temperature based on when you're awake and when you're asleep. But just stay up all night tonight. Don't do it, but stay up all night tonight, and you'll still hit that temperature low at the same time. Stay up all night and then start adjusting your circadian rhythm. And now you're going to start adjusting when your temperature low is, when your temperature peak is, and you're going to hit your life. But that's probably roughly a princess bride before you wake up. That's about when it's going to happen. And you can affect your temperature with a lot of things, right? The non-photic stimuli, exercise, drugs, stuff like that. Now, the other part of this that we talked about on Wednesday is we have adenosine building up. And as adenosine builds, we have that sleep pressure, the sleep hunger pressure. And we go to sleep and we decrease it, right? We reduce adenosine, and then we wake up and we start building. And so this is Matthew Walker, and it's just you can't watch him present. He did the master class, if you know what that is, and when I watched that, I'm like, oh, I got to get this guy's book, because you can't watch him and not just love the guy. He is so passionate about what he does. I understand when people come to my lectures and like, man, I don't like that guy, because I'll make insensitive, my sentences seldom are sensitive to world populations. And jokes go too far and I move on. And I just, there's an amount of like aggression or something like that in my voice. Matthew Walker, you should watch this guy speak somewhere. A podcast, or he must be on YouTube somewhere or something like that. And you can't watch it and not just find him totally adorable, but he is also probably the best sleep researcher in the world. He's over at Berkeley, and he used to be at Harvard. Now he's at Berkeley, and what a wonderful researcher. And so at some point, everyone should read his book. That's him. But the time where
Can
you have
you
this,
repeat his name? I'm sorry.
Matthew Walker. Walker, just like you're walking. And so if you type in, I cite a couple of his studies in this lecture, but at some point, I did it on Audible, and he doesn't read it himself, but he has a narrator who's actually good, who reads it. Except the thing that drives me crazy in that book is they always say adenosine. I'm like, you mean adenosine? But wonderful book. It's at some point in paper or in Audible, something like that. They're both really, really good, and go into more detail, or at least there's more content than I talk about. I've taken a lot of the good parts, the relevant parts for this lecture, but wonderful book and wonderful professor. So, urge to sleep, the greatest urge is going to be when your temperature is falling, right? You don't have that urge from cortisol. You don't have that urge from epinephrine. The temperature is falling. Ideally, you'll start be getting your melatonin being released, and your adenosine is peaking. man, you want to fall asleep. You just are ravenous in your appetite for slumber at this point. Here, and what you want is to have a big difference so you can fall asleep, a huge difference so you can fall asleep. And over here, you want to have a point where you have really low adenosine and you have, your temperatures rising, you get your cortisol and epinephrine, all this urge to move in combination with really low adenosine. And adenosine builds and builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and then crashes when you sleep, and that's what you want. So that's a really beautiful looking diagram of what you want to see. Now, what people do to themselves is like there'll be caffeine, and so it sort of blocks adenosine binding, and there's going to be like a huge adenosine rebound after the caffeine. It gets a little ugly with the adenosine inhibition. And it can get ugly with the temperature and the light exposure and stuff like that too. So these, if you look like this, you are going to live to like 109 years old. And doctors, what is that? Please, I don't know, is he a doctor? I'm only 109. I mean, sleep is probably the most important behavior that you can have in life. Is it more important than exercise? Yes. And I say that as a muscle physiologist, right? Exercise and the incorporation of metabolism and human movement and everything. What is more important, exercise or sleep? Sleep. What is more important, a healthy diet or sleep? Probably sleep. But again, these things depend on doses. So when we say exercise or sleep, are we totally sedentary? Are we just living in bed? Are we like bedridden? And then sleeping 8 rather than 6 hours. Okay, I take back what I said. But in terms of we have a healthy life, and now we've added in specific cardiovascular exercise or something, or we get an hour of sleep a night. Oh, that sleep is like ridiculously more powerful than exercise at preserving our health. And now consider things like specificity of adaptation. Sleep isn't going to prepare you on its own to be a better runner. Right? Isn't going to prepare you on its own to be a better basketball player. You have to actually practice your skills. But sleep really enhances those skills. So caffeine and adenosine. So there's caffeine. This is the adenine right here. This is ribose down here, a little 5-carbon sugar. This is adenine. So adenosine is this little sugar with adenine. And so it's a competitive inhibitor. Caffeine is going to dock. It's going to bind to the receptor in the place of that adenosine. And so adenosine builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And that's your sleep pressure. That's your hunger for sleep, your need, your urgency, your appetite for sleep. You're getting tired and, I just want to get into bed. I just can't wait to get into bed. That's a bunch of adenosine binding, the more adenosine binding. And then you drink your caffeine. I say drink because it's just everyone gets it in the form of coffee. You can get it in the form of chocolate. You can get it in the form of Coca-Cola. Get it in the form of whatever. You can take pills, no-dose, or what. You can get it in any form. But you take your caffeine, and it docks where it binds, where the adenosine is supposed to. And so, I guess we don't have as much adenosine as I thought. It's time to wake back up, right? And now I drink caffeine very specifically on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. I have enough need to focus. If I'm just too lethargic while I'm lecturing, it's like just boring. I bore myself and it's embarrassing. So having to lecture, having the necessity of lecturing, I don't need caffeine on these days, so I don't have it. And if I do have caffeine on a lecture day, you can tell because I talk way too fast. It's way too fast. I'm like sweaty, and I get twice as much information done in the same time block, and everyone, that was horrible. I have to listen to it at like half speed. And so when I lecture, I don't do caffeine. And then Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, I do caffeine, but I have a specific time that I control when I begin and when I end. And we'll talk about that on Wednesday. I'll tell you what I do with caffeine. But adenosine has a lot of effects, and you inhibit those effects when caffeine docks, when it parks where the adenosine is supposed to. With this competitive inhibition. Okay, let's move on to sleep itself. And I will talk about sleep stages, sort of what's happening, a little bit about what's happening in those stages, and then the consequences of eliminating those stages. And then on Wednesday, again, I realize it's after the semester, but it's just going to be, let me tell you all the best things you possibly can do to dial in your sleep and the benefits of doing so. The healthiest thing, the change you'll ever make in your life if you decide to incorporate it. So we have these ultradian cycles, and they happen about 90 minutes. About every 90 minutes, we're going through these cycles. And I am just going to talk about REM and non-REM, rapid eye movement, and not that, right? Non-REM sleep. But there are stages of non-REM sleep. And if you're wearing a Fitbit or a Whoop or one of those like sleep rings or whatever, it'll tell you these cycles. It'll usually just say something like light, deep, REM, awake, something like that. But here's you awake in the first cycle. So this is early in the night. We went to bed at 11 o'clock. Okay, and we get up at 7. That's this. Now notice slow wave sleep. That's sometimes what this is called. I'll show you the waves. But deep sleep, non-REM deep sleep. There's a little bit of a difference between like slow wave and but we can think of them sort of functionally. We can lump them together. So non-REM deep sleep. Notice there's a lot in this first ultradian cycle, this one. In the second ultradian cycle, there's less, and then there's less, and then there's less, and then there's none. Early in the night, we really favor non-REM deep sleep. In those early ultradian cycles, you're going to favor non-REM deep sleep. Now, REM sleep, we favor later in the night, early morning, the wee hours. That is when we're having these creative bursts of REM sleep. So the second half of the night, right before the sun is coming up, maybe after the sun has come up, depending on your sleep schedule, we are experiencing the bulk of our sleep is going to be REM sleep. Now, again, this is like what would be a beautiful look at an EKG or something where it's obvious what's happening here. If I had a sleep study. I think maybe JP has some people. You go get your EEG, you lie there, you have all these wires all over you, and you try to hold your pee all night. And you'll look at these different rhythms, and it's a little bit uglier than this. It's just messy, just like the stock market. It's up and down, it's up and down, it's all over the place. It's just so jagged. It's serrated practically, these things. But this is the generality of it is this, where early in the night, in these early ultradian cycles, you're favoring deep sleep. Later, you're favoring REM sleep. Now, let's say you are sleep deprived for a little while. It's finals week and you're up all night studying. Worst decision you can make. You're up all night studying and trying to cram and do all of this stuff, and experiencing brain damage by doing so, and remembering things worse than you would if you just studied less. So what happens when you go to sleep again? Well, you've built up a ton of adenosine. You have this added adenosine pressure, sleep pressure. So you fall asleep. What recovers first? You've depleted both REM and non-REM sleep, deep sleep and REM sleep. I'm going to ignore the other ones and just say deep and REM. Deep sleep recovers first. That's the thing that rebounds first. Does it ever rebound fully? No. You don't get to pay back your debt. You accumulate debt and you can never pay it back fully. You try. Your brain remembers what type of sleep you've lost. How much REM sleep did I lose? How much deep sleep did I lose? And it tries to recover. It tries to compensate. It compensates first by deep sleep, and then it compensates later with REM sleep. But they are both critical to human functioning, to health, to survival, to learning, to motor coordination, to fact memorization, anything that involves your body and its function. Both of these, deep sleep and REM sleep, are critical to the preservation and improvement of both of those things. But deep sleep happens early in the night. REM sleep happens later. Now, people wonder, like, why do I go through these weird cycles? Why don't I just go deep, 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 REM, 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 and like do go one and then the other? Well, it might get weirdly disrupted um, if you're only sleeping 5 hours a night for a while. Well, then you just are totally denied REM sleep and you're gonna die. Now, if you can selectively deprive REM or selectively deprive deep sleep. There are studies, study techniques for selective deprivation, and you'll die in either case if you go too long without either one. But your body attempts to do the best it can to get the optimal amount of both. But the sympathetic nervous system is so much more powerful than the parasympathetic nervous system. And so we can will ourselves awake. We can force ourselves to be awake. It's so hard to force ourselves to sleep, which everybody knows. That's why everyone takes Ambien and stuff. That's why people take melatonin and Ambien and do whatever, like, I'm going to listen to ocean sounds when I go. We're doing the best we can to force ourselves to sleep. We're doing the best we can to force our parasympathetic nervous systems into a moment of calm, relaxation, into sleep. But it's easy to just stay awake. Like, ooh, I'm excited, I want to stay awake. And people have all these ridiculous strategies when they're driving. Oh, I slap myself while the AC is on. Something. Okay, well, that doesn't work. That doesn't do it. But we're definitely capable of overexpressing sympathetic nervous system activity to force ourselves awake. Now, here's the deep non-REM sleep, slow wave sleep, people will call it, but deep non-REM sleep, you're getting waves that look like that. Notice awake and REM sleep, they like look the same. Like, how do you tell the difference between those two things? I'll show you how we tell the difference between those two things in a little bit, but the summary first is, remember, when you're in REM sleep, you are paralyzed, right? You have sleep paralysis. So just instead of just looking at the EEG, look at an EMG. Look at an EMG too, and the tonicity. You will see, if you're awake, you will see muscle activity, skeletal muscle activity. If you're asleep, you do not. So that's really how you tell the difference. All right, is this person awake or are they in REM sleep? Look at the skeletal muscle. The eyes will still be going, but skeletal muscle, and your like heart will still be beating, and your ventilatory muscles will still be ventilating, your digestive muscles. So these any muscles that you are not in voluntary control over are fine to keep going. Your skeletal muscles are not. So the different stages of sleep, again, non-REM and REM. The deep sleep, non-REM deep sleep, and REM sleep, those are the two that really seem to matter most, that have the most function. Now, the thalamus. The thalamus is a gate where all of your sensory information is sent to be processed to let you know whether to pay attention to these things. Remember, early in the semester, I said, we don't constantly notice things. You put socks on. And I think in quarantine, like, I just never put socks on. I'm just like barefoot all the time. But when I have to actually, do something in the real world, I put socks on, I put shoes on, and I notice that they're on for a second. But like 4 minutes later, I'm like, oh, my socks are still on. Oh, my socks. Oh, my calves. I'm feeling, there's like constriction on my calves. I have calf corsets on. It's still squeezing me. So you stop noticing those things. And so the thalamus is making some of these executive decisions of what sensory inputs we should be paying attention to. Now, there's a condition called fatal insomnia. There, you can look up, there's a case, there's lots. There are multiple cases of this where it's a problem with the thalamus. There's a protein that degrades the thalamus. And there's a guy, Michael Cork, Corke, who had this, and he was fine. He was fine. He was fine. And he was like 40, something like that, 42, maybe somewhere around there. And this protein degrades the thalamus. At this point, the sensory gate opens up and you don't get to desensitize yourself. You fall asleep and you're not supposed to notice the outside world. You're not supposed to know what the hell is going on in the outside world. The thalamus is doing that for you. It closes the gates. All right, sensory info. You stay out there. I am not letting this be processed. This sensory information is not going to be processed. When you're awake, I'll open those gates again and I'll let you know what's happening outside of your eyeballs and outside of your nose and out of your ears and whatever. I'll let you in on the surprise. But for now, we're closing the outside world to you. When those gates stay open because you degrade the thalamus, you die because you can't sleep anymore. And so the thalamus is so critical for survival, and that fatal insomnia, which is genetic. It's very unlikely that anyone here has fatal insomnia. It's a genetic condition that ends in death. And at some point it sets in. But the thalamus is part of this holding cell for sensory information, which then is going to, when you're awake, it's going to permit cognitive sensation of it. So if you think of the thalamus, when you meditate, what you do, if you've meditated before, there's lots of evidence on the effectiveness of meditation. This isn't like a weird thing that weird people do. There is this growing body, and it's already more than compelling body of the effectiveness of meditation. And when you meditate, you bring specific senses. When was the last breath you like deeply thought about, that you covered the entire breath in your conscious perception? Okay, the instant the breath begins to enter, I feel it at the tip of my nose and then down in my chest and then in my stomach, and then I feel it change directions. You don't notice that stuff. And then you meditate and you have these kind of articles or things to focus on, of things for mindfulness. And so you are sort of interacting with the thalamus and saying, all right, thalamus, really open up those doors on meaningless things. I'm going to pay attention I'm going to think about my toes. I'm going to think about my breathing. I'm going to think about some sound of a heater that I've been ruling out for a while because it's unimportant. This doesn't matter, right? I'm going to think about my posture in this chair and the pressure of me sitting against it. And I'm a little bit to the side. There's a cushion that's not quite even. I'm going to focus on all those things. When you sleep, it's the opposite of meditation, although it's interesting that the effects on learning, meditation, or these non-sleep deep rest protocols, stuff like that, you are going to get, just like taking a nap, you are going to facilitate learning better following meditation and to enhance the learning you've already done if you do these things, although it's sort of the opposite of going to sleep. So the thalamus is supposed to be this gate, and if you chew up that thalamus, then it just opens the gate and just becomes leaky to all sensory information. You'll never sleep again and you're going to die. That's not going to happen to any of you. Now, there are areas in the brain that are more active when you're sleeping. Certainly during REM sleep, your metabolism is not that low. Sitting around, non-sleep, non-REM deep sleep, the metabolism is gonna sort of bottom out a little bit. During REM, it's going to be a little bit higher, but there are areas that are as much as 30% more active when you're sleeping than they are when you're awake. You will see the motor cortex be active, although you are not acting out your REM sleep. You don't have norepinephrine, so you have action, but it's not resulting in muscle activity. You have brain activity in the motor cortex. You have brain activity that does not correspond to a resultant motor motion. but you do have brain activity. The visual cortex, obviously, the visual cortex, you're getting a lot of activity there, and you can see it. The hippocampus, you have activity in the hippocampus. The amygdala, you are not getting this intensity of norepi sensation of pain and anxiety and fear, and then all of this intensity of sort of the trauma. But it is active, the amygdala and the cingulate cortex, but you're processing emotions during REM sleep in a fascinating way. When you see post-traumatic stress disorder, uh, you commonly see sleeping problems. You commonly see an inability to process that information. And if you have REM sleep, you're going to go through these. I mean, people who are depressed in REM sleep have reductions of REM sleep, not clinical depression, like psychological, but when they are reduced in their REM sleep, you cannot cope very well. Emotional coping skills are horrible because you process a lot of information in a way that carries no norepinephrine. You process information in this very calm, factual way, and sometimes in weird ways, right? In your dreams, you sort of dream out these things in weird ways. You process all this information, and you can take the sting out of it. And so there's data right now that are emerging on, can we just give people with PTSD better REM sleep and see if we get better outcomes? And there's promising work that's being done there. We're processing information in a non-threatening way, and it improves our coping skills. And if you deny REM sleep, our coping skills suck. If somebody's freaking out all the time, there are times when I have no coping skills, and it's like during ACSM and stuff, and like, man, why is Courtney such an asshole? And I haven't slept. I have no REM sleep because there are deadlines for things, and if I go to sleep that night, I miss the deadline, and so I have no REM sleep for like a week. And A, there's tons of brain damage that happens; it's permanent, and then B, you'll just totally lose your coping skills. And then you recover. Remember, you recover deep sleep first, deep sleep rebounds first, and then REM sleep rebounds. And when REM sleep rebounds, your coping skills come back. And we all go through this. There are days where little things get to you. There are days when little disturbances bother you a lot. Check your REM sleep if that's happening. If that's happening, where you're finding yourself irritable, you're finding yourself unable to cope, you have an inability to uh, assign context, assign a sense of proportion to a problem, you're probably low on REM sleep. But certain areas of the brain are very active during REM sleep, and a lot of that is going to be processing. Now, REM sleep, remember in the 30s, 1938, the cave experiment, right? Let's go into that cave and track our temperatures and our sleep. Nathaniel Kleitman, here he is again in the 50s, and we're identifying REM sleep for the first time in the 1950s. Nobody knew about this shit before then, right? If they knew about it, they never wrote about it. They never documented their knowledge. I mean, it took, I think it was like a graduate student looking at his little baby's eyes and go, man, I got a little demon for a child. Look at these eyes when he falls asleep. But this is University of Chicago again in Kleitman's lab, and they published on what the hell is REM sleep, and we have these rapid eye movements. Now, it's a lot more important, and there's a lot more going on than motion of the eyes. But it's really in the 1950s when this was being outlined of what is going on in this type of REM sleep. Now, is noradrenaline. Remember, norepinephrine is the same thing as noradrenaline. During REM sleep, we don't get it. Right now, this exists pretty much all other times of life. This is going to exist, but there's a neurochemical cocktail that is going to be present when you're sleeping. That's going to determine processing of information, and the norepi during REM sleep just leaves you. I mean, it is just gone. And again, you have to look at the EMG at the same time if you want to really distinguish REM sleep from wakeful states. Look at the EMG, and you will see the difference. So awake REM, deep non-REM, throw on an EMG, and there's just nothing. I mean, you are just paralyzed. So polysonography, this is you're evaluating multiple things here. It's not just the EEG. You're not just looking at the brain waves. And so atonia, not tonia, muscle paralysis, skeletal muscles, right? Involuntary muscles, keep doing your thing. Keep beating that heart, keep breathing that air, right? Keep digesting that food. Now, fascinating is animals other than us. When you start looking at the animal kingdom, let's get out of humans. Who dreams? Which creatures dream in REM sleep? There's some evidence that there's dream-like states or some brain activity that kind of resembles REM in parts of the animal kingdom. But who really dreams? Mammals and birds. Mammals and birds. And there are studies into, well, maybe reptiles is some original source of this type of dream, of this type of sleep, the dream state of sleep. But amphibians, fish, insects, these don't really appear to have dream states. Now, when you start looking at things like seals, when you look at aquatic mammals, it takes your whole brain to do REM sleep. You can do all the other stages of sleep, that's fine, with half a brain. Half of your one hemisphere can shut itself down for some other stages of sleep, fine. REM sleep, you need your whole brain. So if you're an aquatic mammal, you need air sometimes. You need to surface. You need to swim up to that surface and get that air. If your whole brain is sleeping, what happens? Atonia. All right, you can't swim. You have skeletal muscle paralysis. If you're paralyzed, you can't surface. So dreaming in the ocean, if you are an aquatic mammal and you're out there in the great vast blue and you're dreaming, you drown. Now, it's not a complete absence of dreaming. I mean, look at this little adorable thing down here. I mean, stuff like this you'll see on land. Dreams a lot. There's a lot of dreams when it sleeps on land. Put it in the ocean and maybe 5% of the amount, maybe 10% tops of the amount of dreams, the dream time that'll have. So there is a fraction of dream time in the ocean, but if it wasn't that way, the result would be death. So the body naturally suppresses REM sleep in aquatic mammals when they're in an aquatic environment. Now, dolphins, right? The dolphins don't come up on the shore and be like, okay, I'm just going to sleep here on the rocky, beach. I'm just going to sleep here with the seals. You guys don't mind, do you? Dolphins don't do that. They hang out in the ocean. And so how do they sleep? They shut down half of their brain at a time. They sleep with one hemisphere. So half of the brain shuts down. There are times when the dolphin is fully awake. There are times when a dolphin has both hemispheres fully awake, but it sleeps with one at a time. And remember the optic chiasm. So the one eye that is being processed, the left is being processed in the right hemisphere. The right eye is being processed in the left hemisphere. So you process in the opposite eye. You have the optic chiasm. So the dolphins are going to do that. Birds do something very fascinating. Now, birds can dream, and they'll dream about their songs. You can do a little EMG and see, what is this bird singing about? Let's have it sing its song when it's awake, and then it sings its song and it works out its song in its dreams. There's plenty of research on bird dreams, and they're working on their music theory. Now, I'm not a ornithologist or whatever, so I haven't read the bulk of the literature on this, but there's really fascinating stuff in what I have read. Now, we have a line of birds on the pillow. Okay, so they're all going to sleep. That's what this is. It's a sleeping birds. This bird right here and this bird right here are going to sleep differently from every other bird. All of the ones in the middle get to sleep with their whole brain. They get to go into dream sleep, REM sleep. They get to dream about their songs. This bird is a vigilant guardian, okay? It is a sentinel on the lookout for predators. This bird is a vigilant guardian. It is a sentinel on the lookout for predators. Now, they do sleep, but they sleep with half their brain. So they shut down half of their brain, and the outward eye, it stays open, right? So the inward brain is sleeping, that hemisphere. And then after a while, they change directions, face the other way, open up the other eye, and sleep with the other hemisphere in their brain. So on the outside, those ones have guard duty. Now, if a bird is asleep, or if a bird is alone, it is going to sleep with half a hemisphere, with one hemisphere, with half a brain as well. If birds are in a group, then some of them get to dream while the others stay lookout. So birds are fascinating. And when you look at suppression of sleep, most animals in the world, I mean, if you have a dog, if you have a cat, if you have, I don't know, we used to have a student who had a pet raccoon. Um, whatever animal you have, just watch it. It just sleeps whenever it feels like it. Now it feels like a good time to sleep, and it goes on to sleep. What do people do? People are like, no, 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 I can't sleep now. I have to do XYZ tasks, whatever it is. I have to do multiplication tables because I'm in the 3rd grade. I have to do physiology homework because I'm in the 20th grade or whatever it is. And you have to, we do tasks, right? So we force ourselves awake. Animals don't do that. Non-human animals don't do that. They just sort of fall asleep whenever. But birds who are migrating will suppress, because if they fall asleep, but they do get micro sleeps. Birds in migration get micro sleeps, and we actually do too, which is a problem. That's what causes a lot of motor vehicle accidents, is micro sleeps. We have no idea we slept. You sleep for a second or whatever. You have no idea it happened. Just like you fall asleep, and if somebody asks you, you will swear on your mother's grave that you didn't fall asleep, and your mom's going to be pissed because you did, but you have no idea that you did. We get these micro sleeps when we're in sleep deprivation, which is the reason sleep deprivation is worse than alcohol intoxication for motor vehicle accidents. Because alcohol intoxication, usually what happens is our reaction times. We want to take the jumps. Like, oh, I can take that jump, and you want to do that. And then B, we have like a reaction time that's sluggish, stuff like that. You don't hit the brakes fast enough, or you turn the wrong direction, or whatever. You're confused or something. In a microsleep, you don't react. The car starts swerving into the oncoming, and you have no idea because you're actually asleep. And even if you wake up and correct it in time, you just sort of tell yourself a story with your frontal lobes. Oh, here's what happened. I saw that whole thing. Like, no, you didn't. You were asleep. But you will swear again on the graves of loved ones that you didn't sleep, because there isn't a way for you to know that you were asleep. Anyway, moving on. Babies are just asleep all the time. Infants, little, you are in the womb. That is your habitat. You are all wet and hot in the womb, and you just spend the entire time sleeping, but you haven't learned to suppress motor actions yet. That part of your brain is not fully wired and developed. So you don't have an adult's REM sleep where you're paralyzed. And so you're kicking, you're acting out your dreams, stuff like this. Now, babies aren't really having dreams that we think of for a human being, of like, oh, like, because what has a baby seen and experienced and acknowledged? And babies don't know anything. I mean, they don't know anything. So what do they have to dream about? But they do have this REM sleep that they're experiencing, and you'll see them kicking and stuff, but they're totally asleep. They don't know what the hell they're doing. They're just mapping motor patterns, and those motor patterns are going to continue. These frenetic surges, these what seem like these involuntary, what seem like pointless movements. It's okay. Here's what happened in my brain. Let me map that pathway so I know what needs to happen in my brain for me to kick like that again. And eventually you'll learn to do complicated tasks like play piano and walk and stuff. But babies at first are just having these involuntary, weird, they're not pointless, but they don't accomplish anything externally, motor actions, because they have not suppressed. They do not suppress motor activity during REM sleep, but they really, when they're getting ready for birth, I mean, they really ramp up their REM sleep. A couple of weeks before they come out of the canal, it's about 9 hours a day they're in REM sleep, and then in that last week, it's 12 hours a day. I mean, that's a lot of REM sleep that these babies are having. But it's just synaptogenesis, right? It's just these electrical states in their brain that are helping develop the brain, necessary for brain development. Lots of literature on that. Now, as we get older, right, changes throughout the lifespan. As we get older, you're going to eventually hit puberty. What happens during puberty? A phase delay, biologically, you're not rebelling. teenagers or 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, whenever people are hitting puberty, they aren't rebelling and saying, "Oh, I'm going to stay up late." Like what people used to accuse things like what people used to accuse stuff like jazz, and then it was like rock and roll, and then it was rap or whatever, and that parents for the longest time have been accusing their cultural influences as the reason the kids can't get out of bed in the morning. No, it is biology. Biology shifts at puberty, and you are going to delay your your circadian rhythm, and you'll see it differently in females and males, and you see it in mammals who are not human beings, right? Just look at the mammalian world and across species. So here's humans, here's a rhesus monkey, Daegu, lab rat, lab mouse, and so you just look at different animals, and you'll see the same thing. At this puberty is going to delay your biological clock. You will wake up later. You're going to want to go to bed later. That's your circadian rhythm. To enforce a lark's schedule on what is biologically at that age a night owl is to cause irreparable brain damage. And so when you look at the scholastic system in the United States, what is it that we're doing? We're causing brain damage. I mean, I'm not making this up or exaggerating. It is a systematic institution of brain damage for kids. And there are some schools, you can look up data on this, I didn't put it in, but there are some schools who recognize this and acknowledge the literature, which is vast on this subject, and decided to delay the scholastic system. What happened to the SATs? In like 1 year, they went up like 100 points everywhere they do this. It takes like a year, and the SATs are outrageously higher wherever this happens. And so we have to acknowledge that biology comes first, and there's no amount of parental input that is going to overpower evolutionary development. You just can't do it. You can't tell a kid, I need you to be taller. You can't tell a kid like, oh, your hair needs to grow faster. That doesn't work. And you also can't tell a kid you need to get out of bed earlier, because that's the worst one of all, because that actually issues brain damage. So when you get older, and so, puberty happened a long time ago. You don't even remember puberty anymore, let alone kind of womb life. Is where I just put Joe Biden. Joe Biden's a lovely guy, but he's our example of like old folks. When you get older, sleep efficiency gets worse and worse and worse. Okay, so what is sleep efficiency? Let's say you went to bed and you gave yourself a sleep opportunity of, say, 10 hours last night. You laid there for 10 hours and you slept for 5 of them. You were actually asleep for 5 of the 10. That's a sleep efficiency of 50%. Let's say you got 8 hours of sleep out of those 10. Okay, the sleep efficiency of 80%. That makes sense, right? So as you get older, sleep efficiency gets worse. Total amount of sleep time gets worse. Deep sleep, REM, all of these things start to suffer. Now, once they begin to suffer, there's a lot of arguments that people will make. Well, old people just don't need as much sleep. Yeah, and Joe Biden also doesn't need as strong of muscles and bones because he doesn't have them, right? He also doesn't need, a pain-free back because the body just decides to give everyone back pain by that age. He doesn't need, all of these biological problems. Oh, he must not need good vision because his eyes start to deteriorate. He must not need good hearing because he's going to the audiologist now. He needs hearing aids. As people get older, their bodies deteriorate. And we sort of fix everything and say, oh, well, we need strong bones because you're going to fall and break your hip and die. You need good hearing because you can't hear a damn thing I say anymore. And so we need to get you hearing aids. You need your glasses because your eyes are shitty now. As people get old, this stuff suffers. Now, when people get old, what people say is, well, they just don't need as much sleep because if they needed that much sleep, the body would produce it. They would actually get all the sleep that they need. Yeah, but the body isn't producing bone density either. The body isn't producing any of the stuff that it needs. And following deteriorated sleep, what do we see? Well, extreme cognitive decline follows detrimental sleep, right? So what we need to preserve cognitive function is both deep and REM sleep. And that's, we're going to get memory, what's called consolidation. Early, we learn something short term and we fill up our hippocampus. The hippocampus is, let me learn something right now and recall it in a minute. Let me hear your phone number, and 5 minutes later, I'll say it back to you. Hippocampus stuff. And people try to load up their hippocampus for tests, and that's ludicrous, right? Don't do that. Don't try to memorize stuff and cram it into your hippocampus. Your hippocampus has a tiny hard drive. Your hippocampus has a small data ceiling and is for short-term memory. How do you move that short-term memory to long-term storage silos? Sleep, especially deep sleep, to sort of transport it to longer term memory sites. You need deep sleep. If you don't get deep sleep, you don't do that. You don't move it into long term storage. So if you stay up all night studying for a test, 2 days later, you don't remember anything ever again about that test, unless you decide, I'm going to actually learn it this time instead of cramming. And so let me sit down and learn the material in the morning, and then I'm going to meditate or do a non-sleep deep rest protocol, and then I'm going to get back to it. I'm going to learn more after that. And there's evidence you learn 20% or so. There are multiple studies, so I can't just say 20% across the board, right? There are multiple studies that show how much better you learn after doing that meditation or non-sleep deep rest, or even just take a 20-minute nap, something like that. And then you'll remember it for a really long time, and you'll actually remember things that you couldn't remember earlier, you couldn't remember before sleep. If you learn something and then you're asked like 5 hours later, oh, recite me this thing. Like, oh shit, I can't remember. Well, go to sleep. In the morning, I'm going to ask you again, and you might actually remember it in the morning. Tons of evidence for that. That you can actually, the recall, the retention, the recall, this happens during sleep, and it cannot happen without sleep. And so that's where you see sleep deprivation and the effect on learning, what it's going to have on our ability to retain. And REM and deep sleep are both critical for this process. Again, that hippocampus is where we're going to store stuff in the short term, but it fills up and you're going to constantly erase to make more room. And you have tons of room. There's tons of room in the cortex, right? Neocortex, tons of room. But you have to go through real sleep. You can't go through alcohol sleep. You can't go through Ambien sleep. Those don't do it. Those won't move. If you take your Ambien and then go try to take the test the next day, you don't remember anything because it's as though you stayed up all night because you didn't go through the movement of that memory. You didn't go through consolidation. You didn't move that memory to a permanent site where it can be recalled. So natural biological sleep is what leads to a brain with a recall. So sleep is going to protect your memory. And if you want motor skill, it's the same thing, right? So everybody who's played a sport or played an instrument, something like that, knows you practice and practice and practice, especially if it's an instrument, because it's so acute, it's so immediate. You practice and practice and practice, and you're like, my fingers just won't do it. It's sort of like jagged, or it's sort of jarring in the way that I'm doing my, I'm sort of jumpy. Let's just do a bunch of J words where I don't have, it's not smooth. I'm not playing this piece well. I'm pausing here, and I have to look at my fingers over here, and it's just, it's sort of scattered and disjointed, and then you go to sleep and you wake up and you can just play. Or you can just play it. It's on the guitar, it's on the piano, whatever. You just get to play in the morning. Skill, a lot of that is going to be the non-sleep deep rest, the stuff that happens first. So, and the stuff that you recover first if you're sleep deprived. But so if you just go to sleep for, 6 hours, something like that, you're going to be able to wake up and probably just play because you've had a lot of non-sleep deep rest and putting those motor skills into effect. Now, if you practice and practice and practice and don't sleep, you actually don't get better. So what are you, a lot of people are like, oh, I just stay up all night practicing. Well, no wonder you suck at your instrument, right? No wonder you can't make a free throw. Obviously, that's how the human body works, right? That's how a nervous system works. You're never going to make a free throw if you do that. And so sleep is such a critical uh, accelerant. It's such a critical. It's not just an accelerant. It is the only way. So it's not like oh, it's a shortcut. It's the only cut. It is the only way to secure motor learning or to secure fact retention, stuff like that. Now, we have tons of people who pretend to sleep. Whether they do, who knows? They pretend like I only need 4 hours of sleep a night. Okay, it's Ronald Reagan, Winston Churchill, people like this. I only have to sleep 4 hours a night. Yeah, but it's unsurprising that you had terrible dementia, right? Because what happens when, and again, we have norepinephrine and we have acetylcholine. Acetylcholine, we can overpower this thing, right? Acetylcholine, this is parasympathetic. Norepinephrine, we get to stay awake. You can force yourself awake. Just put your mind to it and you can stay awake. You can't put your mind to it and fall asleep. Put your mind to it, you're gonna force yourself to stay awake, right? Your thoughts are gonna be racing around. You're gonna be like sleep is just like impossible. But all these people who talk about, Donald Trump does it too. All these people who talk about, oh, I need 4 hours of sleep. Yeah, but I am so unsurprised when the Alzheimer's is like the most severe that I've ever heard of. Like, that happens to everybody who gets 4 hours of sleep. And so maybe bragging about deficits is not what we should celebrate. In business and culture and medicine and school and everything, people brag about deficits of sleep as though it makes them more accomplished, as though they have 20 hours in the day to make progress, when the reality is they have zero because they can't consolidate memories. The cells are just constantly dying. They have an inability to retain anything. And yet they brag, right? Just listen to the Trumps of the world. Now, looking at the insufficient sleep, what causes it, right? Disruptions of sleep, what causes this stuff? Oh, your environment, a noisy environment, a polluted environment, a threatening environment. Lots of things are going to cause disruptions of sleep. But what's interesting is an unfamiliar environment. Go to a hotel for the first night. Go sleep, go like couch surf, or go just sleep somewhere and you don't know you're in a hospital bed or you're at an Airbnb or something. The first night you sleep like a bird, literally like a bird. Half of your brain stays awake. You can sleep, it doesn't stay awake, but it barely sleeps, right? You mimic the vigilant bird, you mimic the guardian bird, where one hemisphere sleeps more deeply than the other. One of them stays much more awake. So what they do is they present some sort of, sound, some sort of unfamiliar sound, a threatening sound, something that should, like, oh, what is that thing? And left and right hemispheres, right? What actually happens when they have, a deviant sound, they call it. The left hemisphere, man, that thing notices on day one. On day two, it's fine. Like day two, this is a familiar territory. All right, I slept here last night. It was safe. Nothing happened to me. I'm comfortable shutting my whole brain down now and actually getting like REM sleep and doing the real thing. But you just really like sleep with like half a brain when it's an unfamiliar location. Now, time zones. There's a lot of data here that you're going to die younger. You will die earlier if you experience jet lag often. The more often you experience jet lag, the shorter your life is. And it is a powerful relationship. And it depends which direction you fly, how severe your jet lag is going to be. If you fly east, just fly from California to New York. Okay, now what happens when you get to New York? Well, it's 3 hours earlier. Okay, so now you have to go to bed 3 hours earlier. Let's say you go to bed at 10 o'clock usually. Okay, you're going to bed at 7, at your 7 o'clock now. That's hard to do. Remember, it's easier to partner with your norepinephrine, with your sympathetic nervous system, than it is to partner with acetylcholine, with your parasympathetic. You can't just go to bed at 7. If you go to bed at 10 every night, oh, I'm at 7 o'clock, I'm going to go to bed now. It's really hard to do. Now, what you can do if you're flying east to west, if you're flying from New York to San Francisco, that's 3 hours later, right? Oh man, you have built up sleep pressure. Your adenosine is high. Now you're going to bed 3 hours later. You can fall asleep, right? It's easier to fly west than it is to east. And you see there are studies that look at the mortality but differences in whether you're flying east, whether you're flying west, whether there's no kind of transmeridian travel, if it's just like travel time, if you're not changing time zone, stuff like that. But think about it. You can't ride a horse or take a jog and change time zones. Our genes had no way of expecting jets. Jets did not exist in biological history or its anticipation. And so we have no way of adjusting to such a threat. And so it is merely received as damage. It is not something we can build immunity to, right? We can build alcohol tolerance. We can build tolerance to altitude. We can build tolerance to just about everything. Good luck building tolerance to jet lag, because the body could not possibly anticipate the existence of this thing. There's just, I changed 7 time zones. It's such a assault on our bodies. And it might take about a day to go an hour for your suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, to adjust itself an hour. So if you fly, say, 9 hours, now, if you fly to the antipode, the opposite side of the world, who cares what direction you flew, west or east, whatever, it's the exact opposite timing. I don't know, maybe it's going to take 12 days or so to adjust, something like that. But if you fly east, if you fly west, it can be differently oppressive. But think, maybe a day or so. And what we see in the literature is, you look at cabin crews who don't have time to adjust, you see atrophied brains. Literally, you see brain damage in people who have repeated, pilots and cabin crews, not people who are staying within a time zone or two. Like, well, I don't do any overseas stuff, right? I'm just a national pilot or whatever. I just sort of fly back and forth from California to LA, or from LA to whatever, Seattle or something, or even just a couple of time zones. So that's fine. That's fine. But you will see brain damage. You will see atrophied brains, smaller brains in people who don't give themselves time to adapt and have chronic jet lag. And you'll see a very noticeable cognitive decline, inability to remember things, stuff like that. And that's not necessarily somebody I want flying my plane. Now, looking at the consequences of deprivation. Peter Tripp, he was this radio DJ. In 1959, New York was in this like glass box, and he's like, all right, I'm going to do sleep deprivation, right? It was in the 50s. Benefit the March of Dimes, right? So he sits in this glass booth in Times Square for a long time, and he's hallucinating, terrible psychological suffering, and sort of had problems for life. Fast forward the world, let's go to 2000, I think it's 2007, something like that. Yeah, 2007. And there was this guy who tried to break the Guinness Book of World Records. 264 sleepless hours in a row. Okay, he's I'm playing pool, and I'm doing what I'm just trying to say. I'm trying to focus on my norepinephrine. I'm trying to stay sympathoadrenal here. But the Guinness Book of World Records does not recognize this anymore. It's like, well, I'm not writing that down. The Guinness Book of World Records actually already had withdrawn by the time this guy did it, right? This is from Wikipedia. The Guinness Book of World Records since 1990, it no longer accepts sleep deprivation due to the possible health risks. Now, this is just a Wikipedia page saying it, but there are tons of articles that say this too. The Guinness Book of World Records, not only do they refuse to acknowledge sleep deprivation because of how harmful it is, they don't even report the old records because they don't want to encourage people to try to beat them. Okay, let's put this into perspective. The Guinness Book of World Records will not even report old records. They erased them. The Guinness Book of World Records erased all of its attempts. You can't find them. Now you can find them on non-Guinness sites, but I looked a few days ago. I couldn't find them. But here's stuff you can still do. Most spears caught from a spear gun above water in 1 minute. This person caught 20 spears. Somebody's shooting spear gun at somebody and he was catching them. And this person also holds the record for most spears caught from a spear gun underwater in a minute. So you can take a gun, a spear gun, and shoot it at somebody rapidly above water, below water, 2 separate records. You can still compete for that today in the Guinness Book of World Records. You are not allowed. The Guinness Book of World Records does not report and will not acknowledge anybody trying to beat sleeplessness, because which of those is more dangerous? Which causes more health trauma? Society has decided sleep deprivation is worse than being shot at by a spear gun. Now, we see this all the time in tons of contexts. You don't even have to travel. All you have to do is have daylight savings time, right? These acute myocardial infarctions, right, heart attacks on the Monday after daylight savings time, it always spikes. Always spikes. Strokes spike. These cardiovascular complications spike on daylight savings time. A circadian disruption of 1 hour in like the comfort of your own home, and we're spiking on things like heart attacks. Right? That's how disruptive this stuff is. You get up an hour earlier. Now, dementia. I don't want to spend too much time on this, because what I don't want to do is induce outrageous sleep anxiety where people are just terrified and just, I gotta sleep 16 hours a day. But what you see with dementia is compromised sleep first. Not in every single person ever, but you see compromised sleep first. And a lot of what sleep is doing is we have glymphatic circulation, and we are cleaning our brains during sleep, and we don't get to do that cleaning while we're awake. So being awake is low-level brain damage. That would be a quotation of Matthew Walker. That's his coinage. Low-level brain damage, simply being awake. But you undo it. You clean up your mess when you go to sleep. If you don't sleep, you don't clean up the mess, and conditions like Alzheimer's come. They almost always follow, not precede, but follow losses in sleep, dysregulation of sleep patterns, and then they compound each other. Then it becomes a two-way road. Now, looking at things like obesity, body mass index, we lose glucose regulation with a loss of sleep, and you can induce this pretty quickly. You know, I have a blood glucose monitor. I'll check it. If I'm sleeping poorly, my blood glucose is 10 higher. My fasted blood glucose will go up 10 if I haven't slept well for a few days. So somebody who's super healthy can enter in more than 10, right? Somebody who's really healthy and has nothing even close to diabetes can go to the doctor and be maybe not like super healthy to type 2 diabetes, but super healthy to a diagnosis of pre-diabetic. Well, just go sleep a couple of nights and you'll be super healthy again. Glucose regulation suffers. What else suffers? Leptin is reduced. Leptin provides satiety. Right, leptin is, if you have reduced leptin, you are hungrier, and ghrelin is elevated. Ghrelin, let's go eat. Leptin, we don't have to eat right now. So the relationship, the ratio between leptin and ghrelin changes, and we start making terrible food choices. The onset of diabetes, super associated, but there's obvious reasons. Glucose homeostasis, dysregulation there. Ghrelin is elevated, leptin is reduced, and the endogenous cannabinoid system, the munchies, you know, AMPK in the hypothalamus, we get the munchies. We get an endogenous cannabinoid response that gives us the munchies in the hypothalamus with sleep deprivation. So the entire endocrine system is just set to increase the BMI and induce diabetes in the presence of sleep deprivation. Hormonal dysregulation doesn't end there. We see androgens, testosterone, we see estrogen falling too. Sleep deprivation, just for a few days, you can put 10 years on your life for testosterone levels, guys. So when you start hearing like the Donald Trumps of the world who say like really graphically sexual things and then say, oh, you sleep 4 hours a night. Okay, your testosterone is like 0 then. Like what? That's why you're like such a horrible, like why you have to make such ridiculous claims about women is because you have no testosterone and you're trying to compensate. And so sleep deprivation and testosterone, it's a pretty quick effect. You can get it back. You can get this back, but we've known about this for a long time. It is still being studied relatively recently. Sleep deprivation and driving, it's worse than alcohol. And tons of studies. Here's one. But sleep deprivation, the problem is you get micro sleeps. You get these, you don't know you fell asleep. And again, you would swear on everything holy that you didn't fall asleep, but the reality is you did. And that's where you get so many more deaths. And yet there's no illegality for that. Injuries, just your risk of injury is so high if you're sleep deprived in athletics. A nice way of looking at that is just let's go to the Matthew Walker book, and are you sleeping 9 hours a night? Your risk of injury is really low. Are you sleeping 6 hours a night? It's super high. It's a linear relationship in the literature. Now, cancer is probably the scariest one of all of this, and the World Health Organization now classifies shift work as a probable carcinogen. So not that much is considered carcinogens, cancer causers, right? Shift work is. The World Health Organization has not even that recently, but now classifies it as such. In Denmark, the government compensates women who have developed breast cancer who work night shifts, assuming that night shift work was the cause of their cancer. Now, people can blame all sorts of things for being carcinogens, but how would compromised sleep or compromised circadian rhythms actually cause cancer? It destroys your immune system. Your immune system recovers in sleep. If you have a single night of bad sleep, let's say you sleep 4 hours as compared to 8 hours, you can get a 70% reduction in your natural killer cells. Now, if you have a lifetime of sleeping 6 hours a night, your immune system cannot fight off infections. It cannot ward off cancer. And we see this with studies in which you just keep rats alive for like 15 days or something like that, and they all die. Like you can't live with sleep deprivation. But what actually happens with the rats is, I mean, they wind up with sepsis, but they get covered in like these wounds and stuff because their immune system can't fight off anything. They lose their immune system function so much that just the gut bacteria can kill them. They have no ability to tolerate anything because their immune system is so compromised. Now let's talk. You get all these conditions. Okay, you're in a car wreck. You have cancer, you are injured at your sports game, whatever, because of a lack of sleep. Let's say you decide to go to the hospital. You go to an American hospital to cure, remedy, or fix these things. Probably a bad decision because the US, among first world countries, that's an old term, it's an outdated term, but we are not good. The US in medicine, we brag like we're advanced. We always brag. The most advanced place in the world for healthcare, whatever. We are horrible. Why are we so bad? I mean, look, this is not just like the Commonwealth Fund. Okay, here's from the World Health Organization, the efficiency of the medical system. France, they're really doing well. Here's the United States. We're right behind Costa Rica. There's Cuba, Slovenia, and Costa Rica. That's where we are. And this is actually like there's some of them where it ranks us worse than this, but this is the World Health Organization. Here's where the US is. We are not good. The sleeplessness, the hours that the doctors work, right? I mean, they're working these outrageous like overnight shifts, medical school, residency. Those residents, I mean, they're working like 80-hour weeks. The residents are. How are they supposed to function? You look at the number of deaths caused by residents because of sleeplessness. What is the cause of death? Well, medical malpractice, right? The third leading cause of death in the United States, number 3, is medical malpractice. Heart disease, cancer, doctor errors. That's number 3, doctor errors. Now, we don't see that elsewhere. Elsewhere, where the sleep schedules are reasonable, we don't see these mistakes. And you can correlate, there's lots of work correlating these mistakes, these doctor mistakes, with compromised sleep. So sleeplessness is terrible. Sleeplessness is really rough, really terrible. But there's tons of stuff that you can do that's super effective at restoring sleep. And yeah, man, your life will be changed if you do it. And don't get all that weird sleep anxiety and get like scared and stuff. You have youthful brains that are still growing and developing, and synaptogenesis aplenty. There's nothing to panic about. But there is plenty to change. And on day is it today? It's Monday. On Wednesday, it's just nothing but change. That's what we'll talk about. Did that just put everyone in like a terrible mood?
It made me sleepy.
All right, good. Take a little nap. Maybe it's a little bit late for a nap, but yeah, sleep is probably the most important thing we can do for our health. And again, lots of ways to optimize it, because everybody, I mean, just about everybody has a sleeping problem. I mean, you look at the numbers. I mean, just go through the literature and look at the numbers. And if you have a horrible sleep schedule, you are not just among the majority, you're among pretty much everybody. It's the most surprise. I mean, that's why these drugs like Ambien are making, I mean, like billions of dollars. What Donald Trump would say, billions and billions. I mean, that's how much these drugs are making. Because everybody has sleep problems. I mean, it's just like world over, we're just sleep deprived, especially in the US. So you are not alone in your terrible sleep schedule if you have one. If you have a good sleep schedule, you are alone. If you have a good sleep schedule, you are among such a slender minority. And stay there. That's a good demographic to find yourself among. For the rest of us, me included, we have work to do to get there.
For that,
go ahead, Nick.
Okay, I was like, for that study that you showed about the sleep, about chance of injury and sleep, is there like, what is like, I guess, like the common mechanism in the sleep that causes the injury?
It's a good question. It's probably multifaceted. So one of the things, you look at sleep recovery, where athletes are unable to recover effectively between performances, between exercise, bouts of engagement. You can't recover effectively. The break point gets lower and lower and lower. And so what used to be a normal stress load becomes too much for that tissue to bear because it wasn't able to recover. But then also there's just a lack of attention, a lack of focus, bad decisions, stuff like that, that you have a hard time having your reaction time is poor, stuff like that. So there's going to be mechanical kind of reaction time, poor performance that creates an environment that could lead to, some ACL thing or whatever. But then also the break point of your tissues is reduced. And there may be more to it than that, but definitely those two things. Yeah, so when I was just reading the comment box, start times for things. I mean, we see with athletes at Pacific, there's often like start times at 5 a.m. We know that worsens performance more than it improves it. I mean, just study after study after study after study. You might as well just not participate at all. And I know people are working around academic calendars. It's like, look, the only time I can do this is 5 a.m. Okay, but we're looking at genetically shifted circadian rhythms that are later, biologically later. This isn't a choice in the athletes. This is biology determining their circadian rhythms. A suprachiasmatic nucleus says, nope, you have to wake up later. And so when you make them wake up earlier, what do they lose? Well, they lose REM sleep. The REM sleep is so critical. They may still get the deep sleep, the deep non-REM sleep, because they're getting that early in the night. The later night, as if you wake up early, that's what you are compromising. And those deficits of REM sleep in terms of human performance in just about every capacity just really suffer. And so, yeah, I think the athletes, now what you don't want to do, I would not do intense exercise within 2 to 3 hours of going to bed because of the thermic effect. you're going to adjust your temperature. Your temperature should be falling at that point, and then you have this weird blip where it increases, and that's going to throw off your circadian rhythm. It's going to confuse you a little bit. What you want, remember the um, uh, astronauts. You're all up in outer space, and interestingly about the astronauts is, I mean, they see 16 sunrises a day. Their circadian rhythms are a mess, and they have very specific things to try to establish healthier circadian rhythms so they don't come back with like weird psychoses. But the astronauts, the visual system has to map on to their balance, and so when they're looking at microgravity and its effect on the inner ear, the vestibular apparatus, what you're supposed to be sort of stabilizing your body position with, there's confusion in the inputs. They get these weird mixed signals. And it's the same thing with your body. If you're trying to fall asleep and you're trying to wake up, I want to be alert at this time. I want to be asleep at this time. But we give ourselves mixed signals, whether that's light exposure at night, whether that's heat at night, whether that's darkness in the morning. There are mixed signals that we get that totally mess up the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It doesn't take that long to fix these things. I mean, within a week, you could be like a totally different person. So it really doesn't take very long to fix these things, but people don't do it owing to the convenience of temperature, of just, I'll just set it at 70 degrees all the time in the house, or wherever people set it. Don't do that. At night, drop it to at least like 65. If you love a hot house and it's like 75, okay, we'll drop to 65. I wouldn't go below about 55 because then you're going to have some opposing problems. But mid 60s, low to mid 60s, that's a great place to set the temperature. So you can start to get the temperature to just to give your body those metabolic signals of, oh, hey, I'm still on Earth. This is what happens on Earth. Here's when it's light out. Here's when it's cold out, to give yourself those biological signals. But then also to understand what your own circadian rhythm is when you're giving yourself the right signals. Who cares what your sleep schedule is at this moment, because it's probably messed up. But once you dial it in, you'll really know when you're supposed to sleep and when you're supposed to be awake. And your awake times, I mean, there's no need for like coffee and meth or whatever it is people do to wake up. There's no need for that stuff if you get serious sleep. You will be as alert as all the coffee in the world couldn't make you that alert. And then you use coffee advantageously on top of that. But we get mixed signals, and that's really what messes us up. And so fixing all those inputs, your brain will understand the difference between alert times and slumbering times. And so you'll be like a monster in the classroom, a monster on the basketball court and whatever. But what you have to do is start picking sports and jobs and classes and careers and whatever that correspond to your circadian rhythm. And people, the life doesn't always permit, if you are a night owl, lots of jobs, like, no, you have to be a morning lark. But if we can accommodate, we should.
So do you think sleeping with a blanket would be bad if you're like doubled up on blankets or something?
I mean, it depends. We'll talk about this stuff. I mean, sometimes you can get a rebound effect. Like, that's why I shower before I go to bed. I try to go outside. Did I do it today? I didn't do it today. I try the best I can to incorporate as many of these techniques as I can. But I usually try to get my morning lux. I try to take a shower at night before bed, because what you warm up when you're in the shower, but then you get a rebound effect where your internal temperature drops afterward. And so what was your question? I have no idea.
That about sleeping with blankets.
Blankets. So we'll talk about this. Your hands and feet are really sensitive to heat and vasodilation, and so there's. It depends on your core temperature. If you're under the blankets and you're sweating and stuff, nah, don't do that. You just want to have a nice, comfortable temperature. Your temperature is going to fall, even under the blankets is going to fall. But if you're like, well, I have my heated blanket on, I just like to sweat a little bit. Like, well, you're probably going to be away. If you're a great sleeper already, that's okay. But if you're not sleeping that well, I would change the temperature and light exposure before anything, because those are the two biological drivers that aren't just mixed signals. Exercise and nutrition, stuff like that are mixed signals, but sleep, light and temperature are the signals. Those are the signals. And so you can't mess with those and be like, well, I'll just try to exercise at a particular time to get non-photic alertness. So that's not going to be powerful enough. You got to get your light and your temperature dialed in. And the rest of it, you can mix up signals a little bit here and there. But yeah, so that's all we'll talk about on Wednesday, is just here's how to improve stuff to the best of science's understanding. Way better than drugs, though. I mean, it works way better. All right, I got extra office hours for my epi class at 4:15, and it's after 4 already. So let's get out of here. I'll see. I don't know. Probably some of you on Wednesday. I don't know who wants to come to a class after the semester is over, and then I'll get our test put together, and I'll try to have it up by Wednesday night. I'll try to have our test up.
How long will we have to complete it? Really quick.
A week.
Oh, okay.
Whenever the last day of finals is. The last day of finals will be the final day of completion. I wouldn't wait to start it until then, because you might want to do it a couple of times.
Okay, cool.
All right. I'll
Have a
see
good one,
everyone.
everybody.